Hello everyone, welcome to week 2 of range measurements. We're out here today. My name is Becky Brzeziska and I'm your range instructor for 4th session. I'm out here today with Ariane Brazenwood, and we're going to demonstrate for you 2 different methods, a cover method and a frequency method for assessing range condition. And so the data that we're going to be collecting is plant species composition, and then later on in your reports you're going to be comparing those 2 data types. So you're going to be comparing the range scores that we get for the cover method and the range scores that we get for the frequency method.
Before we get started collecting data, let's get a little bit better idea about where we are in the world. So let's zoom in on Mountain Campus. You can see it here. Here's the buildings, and it's kind of sits in this little valley. It's at about 9,000 feet elevation. And the area that we're going to be evaluating specifically on Mountain Campus for your rangeland condition is an area called the Pingree Meadow. So if you take a look at this photograph, you can see, so there's the dark green vegetation of the riparian area, and there's the dark green vegetation of the forested hillside. And what we're going to be assessing is this meadow that's kind of bordered by those 2 areas. So you can see that lighter brown. This photo was probably taken in later summer. And so where we actually collected these data specifically is an area across over here on the west side called the Koenig Ranch Meadow. So I'm going to zoom in on that. And this Koenig Ranch Meadow is called that because it's the old headquarters of the Koenig Ranch. And so you can see all these historic buildings are kind of around there, and maybe some old fencing and whatnot. And so this area does get a lot of traffic. So from people coming through looking at the buildings, and students coming in to look at different plants, because this is an area that has a lot of plant diversity. And it also tends to get a lot of traffic from moose going back and forth between the riparian area over here on the east side and the forested mountains on to the west of it. So that's just a little bit of history, a little bit of geography of where these data have come from.
One of the methods that we'll be using to measure the range condition of this meadow is the frequency method. On your data sheet here, first of all, you'll notice one side is X on cover and the other is X on frequency. So I have the frequency side here, and we have all of our common species of this meadow, and we've got our plot numbers 1, 2, and 3. These are actually going to be transects rather than plots in more of a traditional sense. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to take 100 step transects in a random azimuth line across this meadow. And what we're going to do is at each step, we're going to look down, and we're going to use a pencil or whatever is on hand to identify whatever species is at the toe of our boot. And so, for instance, right here, we have Bromus inermis, the smooth brome. And so I'll come here and I will mark that on my sheet with a tally mark. Then I'll take another step and I'll reach down, and it looks like we have another smooth brome here. So I'll mark another tally on my sheet. And so I'm going to continue taking steps and continue tallying for this transect until I've reached 100 steps, and then I'll make another random azimuth and I'll go in another direction, and I'll complete 2 more plots with this methodology. For the second methodology of range condition assessment, we have percent cover. To measure percent cover, we're going to be utilizing 2 tools: a square meter quadrat, which is going to be randomly located within this meadow 3 times for each of the 3 plots of data that we're generating, in tandem with this ocular sort of estimation device that is a plastic circle that is 1/100th of a square meter. Why this is important is because this is a square meter, and so this area constitutes 1% of the greater area. With these 2 devices, we will be moving through all of the species as well as sort of bare ground, litter, and moss components of the plot, utilizing this estimation device to estimate percent coverage of each species. So for instance, if I were going to come here and start to measure Achillea millefolium, which is our western yarrow in this plot, I would utilize this 1% of the total area circle to say, okay, here's about 1%, here's about 2%, 3%, and those are going to be 5% sort of together. So I would go to my data sheet, and for Achillea millefolium, I would record 5% coverage. If I would then, I would proceed and go through all of the species components observed in this plot in sort of a systematic manner. And so the next thing I might do could be penstemon, because it's fairly dominant in this plot. And so I'd say, here's 1% of penstemon, 2%, 3%, 4%. These guys I'm going to sum up as 5%, 6%, 7%, 8%, 9%, and we'll say these guys here come into 10%, even though they're fairly spread out. And so on my data sheet, I would record 10% coverage for penstemon. As I mentioned, I would then systematically go through all of the species within this plot until I've measured everything, and I have an estimate of everything. One thing to note, because our range plants sort of occupy a vertical space together, I don't expect to measure everything and come out to 100 measurements of coverage, but because, you know, for instance, right here, there's a carex that's sort of occupying the same vertical space as a penstemon, which is occupying the same vertical space as some Taraxacum officinale here. And so this particular 1% of the plot is actually going to be sort of recorded as these three different things. And so because of this, at the end, we normalize in order to account for that by the number of observations in total.